So I work in the Dementia Research Institute at Cardiff University, and of course my main research interest is to predict risk of dementia. If you know about my earlier work, I was mostly involved in genetic studies of Alzheimer's disease and then other types of dementia as well now recently. But cell database is amazing in terms of showing us what other data modalities we could use in order to predict risk of dementia better, and what else can we predict. So just to start with, we know that dementia is primarily a disease of aging and obviously higher dementia rates in all the groups. It's also known that dementia is recognized now as a silent pandemic and also recognized as a public health priority by the World Health Organization. Now, coming back to the UK, about 1.3% of population estimated to have risk of dementia. It's about almost 1 million people. And 1 in 14 people over 65 years of age have dementia, and over 80, it's almost twice higher. So the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and that's where the data sets mostly exist, and that's the disease was mostly studied. And if you look at risk factors, I mean, I will be talking here about Alzheimer's disease, but eventually I'll switch to dementia as well, which we published in 2020. So about 60 to 80% is genetic. That's how estimated from the twin studies. And about 35% that we knew in 2020 were modifiable risk factors. So in the recent Lancet Commission paper in 2024, the percentage of modifiable risk factors has been improved up to 45%. And you can see here, it's a lifestyle, medication, and different types of common diseases and disorders and comorbidities, which are many people at older age have, and they might potentially be modifiable. And the cell database obviously is a perfect resource to look at these modifiable factors, see how risky they are, or any of them are protective, what could be done in order to improve lives. Let's start with Wales and expand it to the whole UK. So Wales database cell data bank covers about 85% of population of Wales. It contains over 10 billion records, amazing, and over 5 million people overall, current and historical. We looked at population of Wales. It's smaller than population of the UK, of course, but it kind of represents the general population of the UK, and in particular from a dementia point of view. In Wales, it's about 1.4% of people living, well, in the whole UK, it's about 1.3%, which was reported by the National Office of Statistics, and in the UK, it's in Wales, it's about 1.4%, so pretty much slightly higher, but pretty much the same. So the first thing which we wanted to do, and since we got access to cell database in 2019, we wanted to see prevalence and incidence of dementia or different subtypes of dementia in Wales, and see if actually the Office of National Statistics is right or wrong. Anyway, we tested that. And what we found, it's interesting results we found, that we split it by age groups. And if you look at the first graph, which represents incidence of dementia or number of cases per 1,000 people, you can see that obviously in the younger groups, which it's got horizontal lines here at the bottom of the graphs, it's kind of low, as you would expect. Then we have quite higher, but almost non-increasing incidence in the age group between 80 and 89, and obviously it's much higher in the older groups. But if you zoom into this area, we could see that in the younger groups, incidence of dementia is going down. So we have less people of younger for dementia age, which are reporting or being diagnosed with dementia, different types of dementia. In terms of prevalence, of course, it grows, especially in the older groups like 80, 89, 90, 99, and 100 plus as well, as people getting older. But again, if you look in the younger groups here, you can see even prevalence in the very young groups are going down, which is, again, I think it's a good positive sign. What else we looked at? when we extracted this dementia diagnosis, we also looked at misdiagnosis or mixed diagnosis of different types of dementia. Again, SAIL is a great resource to look at that. And what we found here, for example, if primary diagnosis is given like Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, let's say, 20% of them will be given Alzheimer's disease as a secondary diagnosis. So it could be mixed pathology or misdiagnosis, so something which was interesting for us to see. And again, showing that the number of people with this kind of mixed diagnosis is large enough to study them further. What also we found in published in our paper that mean age of dementia increases over the period of time which we looked at, but fewer younger cases, which I have said you on the previous slide. Also, what is interesting, that new cases of dementia, although they are risen, the number of people living with dementia are larger. So basically, people live with dementia longer, and in the paper you can see for about 2.5 years longer than before. So it basically is at a slope. Is it good or bad? It's of course difficult to say. Probably depends on the quality of lives of people who are living with dementia. But despite the fact that people live longer in general, this is why we see increased prevalence of dementia. It is also because people with dementia living longer. So the next question which we were interested in, just to compare SAIL results, our Welsh database results with the world observations. And in particular, it's clear, it was known that most individuals with psychiatric disorders have an increased risk of dementia. And many cross-sectional studies which were published about that, they have disadvantages, like they could be a selection bias, it could be underdiagnosis, they could poor population representation, where SAIL is actually an amazing resources because it's a population database. So we use that information to look whether specific types of psychiatric disorders increase risk of dementia and when, and also whether different there is a more severe psychiatric disorders associated with high risk of dementia, and that was true. So here we compared results from SAIL database and UK Biobank. Of course, UK Biobank is small and has its own biases like participation bias. What we can see here on this graph, which we found very interesting, that at this peak at zero, it is when the dementia diagnosis has been given to people. And then you see minus here, it's how many years prior to dementia diagnosis we have a psychiatric diagnosis. So we have peak is for generation or population which we studied here, which is of course older population, is around dementia diagnosis age, which could actually indicate a reverse causality. So these particular people might already have dementia and experience some psychiatric problems like psychosis or depression or anxiety just prior. So that would be a good indication for psychiatrists and basically to psychiatrists if the psychiatric disorder onset is at a later age, it might be indication of dementia rather than actual psychiatric disorder. And these results replicated in the UK Biobank as well. So I think it was an interesting study. The next what we studied, we looked at the sleep disturbances as a risk factor for neurodegeneration, and that was interesting study. Again, we compared the results with UK, or replicate the results in the UK Biobank. Also, we replicated the results in FinGen database, so we are trying to collaborate across to make our results as reliable as possible. And what we found in this study, that poor sleep hygiene and sleep apnea have several, although they have several available treatments, they potentially increase risks of dementia. And if we look properly after our sleep hygiene, it could actually prevent dementia or decrease slightly risk of dementia later in life. And that could something be manageable, something again be taken on board in order to decrease overall risk of dementia in the population. The other study, we looked at dramatic brain injuries. Again, it was a lot of reports about this, and Wales is known for rugby players and champions, in that field. Obviously, having traumatic brain injuries in Welsh population is probably enough to study from the statistical point of view. So what we looked, and yes, we did find that traumatic brain injury increases risk of dementia. What we also found that traumatic brain injury actually more associated with vascular dementia rather than with Alzheimer's disease or any other type of dementia, even when we accounted for stroke and hypertension and other ischemic heart disease. And again, drawing attention to prevent traumatic brain injury would be important. So what this database, again, allows us to look not only at traumatic brain injury close to the dementia diagnosis, again, that could be a reverse causation. We also looked at traumatic brain injury between 1 and 5 years prior to dementia diagnosis, and even 5 years and even longer before the dementia diagnosis. And you can see in this top table, this results are significant, and the risk ratio or odds ratio, hazard ratio in this case, it's about 2, even if you had traumatic brain injury prior to 5 years or longer before the dementia diagnosis. Again, it tells us 2 potential models here. Traumatic brain injury actually could be causal in some way to either directly or indirectly with risk of dementia, or it could be an indication of dementia. So people who has dementia, they might be losing orientation and basically having more traumatic brain injuries than those which they don't. So two mechanisms here. The latest study, the last study which I wanted to, it's an ongoing work in progress. So we're looking at drugs and medications, frontline medications in Welsh population as a risk of potentially protective for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So here I've shown you the process, what we are going through, including people who are alive, 45 plus, and dementia-free at the baseline in 1999. This is where we find that the health records which we are analyzing are quite reliable. Then they should be living in Wales at the baseline also. And then we look at the follow-up studies up to 2018, basically 18, 20 years, in fact, and look at the medications which they have taken and other exposures, and stop observing those people 1 year prior to dementia diagnosis and trying to estimate risk of those people. What we found, again, quite interesting, you can see here a bit more details how exactly we extract ICD-10 codes, how we extract from GP records and clinical records, which covariates include obviously age at the baseline, gender, deprivation index, which is again very useful information which cell database provided, and all related diseases and comorbidities. For this particular study, we have taken hypertension medications, 3 classes rather than specific medications. It's calcium channel blockers, ACE inhibitors, and ARBs. Yes, I will not pronounce it. And what we found, there are 2 independent effects. Also, this database allows you to look at the blood pressure measurements for people. What we found, it's 2 independent effects. So taking the medications is protective to the dementia risk as compared to those people who don't take medications, and also controlling blood pressure is an independent protective factor in the people with hypertension who do not, as compared to who are not controlling their blood pressure. Again, it's something for individuals and public take into account. Yes, please do control your blood pressure, take the medications that doctors you advise. It would increase dementia risk. And you can see here, we've done it in several blocks. So we just taken when medication were taken just before the diagnosis and then further away from the diagnosis, managing them early in life. So that's amazing, and it works. And we've seen protective effects, again, something very positive news to the public. And finally, what can we do with all this information? So at the moment, we studied different aspects of dementia risk. Of course, we want to combine it all together. So now we know how the cell database works, first of all, what information is available, what is reliable, what replicates, and now we can build on it. Again, talking about machine learning models and AI approaches to design the mechanism specifically for dementia. That's my interest, and that's what I would like to do. And try to create a richer understanding of a person's genetic risks. What we also would like to do to combine individuals' genetic profile with this data. Of course, it's not available in cell database at the moment. We can go to other databases or see how that progresses, but that's something needs to be combined and taken together jointly, because genetic risk is also quite high. Also, the next one, build the models to predict not just if someone might develop dementia, but also when, what type, and how their condition might progress. So to take it further, not just risk, take it further and give a bit more information to people if they're interested to know about that. And finally, what this big resource can also allow us to do is to use these machine learning models approaches to ask questions, what if? What if a person with high genetic risk who had managed their blood pressure differently in midlife than now, what will happen to those people? And all this data, which is available in say, I believe will help us to answer this question and build these models. And thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.